We are going to be doing a deep dive into a very interesting subject today, which is on agricultural revolution, which is a part of how we are thinking of advancing agriculture in Africa. And joining me this afternoon, I have a very impressive panel. I wouldn't go into much the details, but I'll just provide very brief intro to each of the panelists. I'll start with Grant Merrick, who is the global lead agriculture for Tony Blair Institute. Grant is an expert in agricultural transformation with over 2 decades of experience. He specializes in agricultural development, rural infrastructure, and climate-smart agriculture. His work has focused on improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers across Africa, making him a key player in food systems transformation. Thanks for joining us, Grant. Followed very closely, Silan Gobas Sami.
That's it.
Okay. Who is the group CEO of Omnia Holdings. Silan is a seasoned business leader with extensive experience in leading large organizations across emerging markets. Under his leadership, Omnia Holdings has expanded globally and become a major player in sustainable agriculture. He has a strong track record in transforming businesses, enhancing operational efficiency, and promoting climate resilience through innovative agricultural practices. You're welcome, Silan. Andrew Ritchie is the CEO and founder of Frontier Growth Fund. He has dedicated over 20 years to developing the African agricultural sector. As a founder of AgriFrontier, a leading agribusiness advisory firm, he has supported the growth of numerous agribusinesses across East and West Africa. His expertise lies in building value chains and overcoming infrastructural challenges to boost agribusiness performance. You're welcome, Andrew. Moving very quickly to Ashish Patel, who is the managing partner of Avishka Capital. I know that's a tongue-twisting. You're welcome. Ashish leads the firm's Africa operations with a focus on impact investing. With over 20 years of experience in strategic investment and growth, he has driven the success of numerous businesses across Africa, Europe, and Asia. He is an expert in leveraging capital to drive sustainability and social impact in agribusinesses. You're welcome. And then last but not the least, William Matovu, who is the country director for HIFA International in Uganda. William has 2 decades of experience in improving food security and farmer livelihoods. At HIFA International, he focuses on creating development programs that empower smallholder farmers, women, and youth. His expertise includes sustainable agriculture, economic empowerment, and scaling businesses to achieve financial independence for farmers. So you agree with me that I have a very impressive panel here today. So I will join the panel and then we will just try to dive deeper into the subject that we want to discuss shortly. Thank you very much, everyone. All right. Can you hear me very clearly? All right. I have the easy job here, so I'm not going to be kidding you. I'm asking questions. They are the ones on the hot seat. So all attention should be focused on them. I think we'll get this started very quickly. And what I would like to do is for you to give an opening remark, just to be able to share your thoughts on what you think about the concept of agriculture revolution in Africa. I mean, it's a very loosely used word, as you can imagine. But from the shape of your experience working in Africa, what does that term mean to you? I'll start with Silan on my right.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. I think if I think of agriculture, it's important for us always to remember that it's a topic that sustains life. So food security and food production is something that's at the heart of life. So for us at Omnia, the revolution, the change that we want to see is greater security from a food perspective, greater economic growth that's created from produce that's produced on the African continent, and perhaps once there's sufficient for everybody to sustain themselves, to then export to the rest of the world. And I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. You really kept to the 1 minute. It seems as if we'll be within time today. All right, I'll move quickly to Ashish. Yeah.
For us, it's really quite simple. I think, for most African countries now, we've been post-independence probably 60 years on average. I think it's just time for us to kind of solve our own problems. Food insecurity at this point is just incredibly difficult to comprehend. So for us, it's quite simple. How do we just kind of build businesses that are not just sustainable, provide impact, but can actually flourish and feed our own markets.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to sort of start with sort of, well, what revolution? I mean, Africa agriculture is actually one of the least productive agriculture in the world. It's 95% rain-fed, it's smallholder-driven, 80% of food comes from smallholders, and yet it's on a continent that will reach 2 billion people by 2040, and 60% of that population rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. That's 1.2 billion, in sort of 15 years' time. What that means is there's a lot of unemployment, there's a lot of youth, there's a lot of hunger, there's a lot of, and then with climate change coming along as well, this is a sector very much in need of transformation, very much in need of a change. But there's fantastic opportunities. It's a continent with great climates, great soils, ample water if it's actually stored. And so, maybe, in the past, there hasn't been that much of a revolution, but the opportunities there, the green shoots are there. In every single value chain, you're seeing some great businesses proving what is possible, whether it be input providers or seed breeders or aggregators, processors, businesses working with all the smallholder farmers. So it is possible to achieve the revolution, and it's starting to happen. But there's a really long way to go.
Yeah, I think we all agree that there really is it's a long way to go. The journey is far, and I think that's one of the reasons why for me, this conversation we want to have here today is not just going to be the typical, let's just talk and move on. The question is, how do we get into the practicalities of driving that revolution in Africa? So thank you very much, Andrew. Grant?
I think it's more of an aspiration than a revolution at this stage. Certainly, political will towards agriculture has changed over the last 5 or 6 years, and that is welcomed. There is no doubt that it's well positioned in that Africa needs to play its role in global food security. But the aspiration needs to translate into some real practical movements, and we don't see a lot of that at this point. I think it's really time for some sober discussions about critical factors that we need to address, such as there remains a lack of clarity on the policy environment, the infrastructure which is required to support agricultural development has not yet been funded or developed. When we talk about funding instruments, there are very few debt and investment instruments which are actually suitable for the needs of agriculture. So I think we're in a great position from a political perspective that this is now a priority for governments, but we need to disaggregate that into a set of actions that become very practical and tangible.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. I think you touched on an important point on how do we translate policy to action, and I'll come back to you later on to see how we can explore that a bit more. William, thanks.
Yeah, to me, it's a sort of opportunity, empowerment, but also survival. I mean, you have a continent whereby 60% of the global's uncultivable land is located onto that continent. But then also you have, close to about 70% of the population being a young population. So the key question is, and yet you also have a situation whereby the continent is importing close to about spending $100 billion per annum importing food. So the question is, how do you tap into that opportunity that exists, using the young force onto the continent, the arable land? How then do you deploy technology to ensure that you can use that opportunity to transform the continent for its survival, more so from a food security perspective?
I think one underlying subject that goes across what everyone has said is that food security is a big problem. And this problem, it's a complex one. And so we explore it in different themes. And I think the first path in which I want us to go on to is how do we leverage capital or investment for agriculture development? as we want to back this revolution or transformation, that we've talked about. And I will start with Ashish, but please, if you have a response to the question also after Ashish speaks, please be free to jump in. I really want this to be a dialogue as much as possible. So for you, Ashish, from your experience, you've invested across multiple geographies, Europe, but interestingly, Asia and Africa, which are all emerging markets, right? And you've seen how the pace of agricultural development has happened in other markets like China, like India, or other places. What do you think needs to happen in Africa from a capital deployment point of view for us to be able to drive that revolution and balance profit with sustainability? What needs to happen?
I think there are a number of things, right? The first one was the point that was picked up around the lack of consistent policies. And we can't generalize Africa, but I'm just speaking on a broad basis. A good comparison would be if you look at the way the India agriculture sector has developed over the last few decades, as well as the areas such as Cambodia, Vietnam. There are very many top-down policies which are ingrained, right? So, for example, the availability of infrastructure from storage to logistics is there by mandate from the government. You have state banks that have dedicated allocation to agricultural financing, and therefore, banks have to have a certain percentage of their lending done to that sector. And I contrast that to, for example, Kenya, where I am, where banks can decide whether or not they want to finance agriculture. Yet everybody needs to have food, and therefore some of the state banks should take it, would probably need to think about this from a strategic perspective of the country's own well-being as opposed to just pure profitability. When we look at investments, we kind of have impact as a filter, right? That by doing something, are we going to create livelihoods? Are we going to have gender equality coming through? Are we stopping the environment from being destructed? We look at all the positive and negative factors from an impact perspective first. On passing that screen, we kind of look at the second part, which is the financial prospects of a business. Because fundamentally, again, we don't believe that if a business is not successful financially, can it be sustainable, or has it got the longer term impact? Now, the profitability that we are looking at in Africa specifically is about solving the problem of moving Africa from a commodity provider to a value addition provider, right? So if you look at, again, some of the big exports from the agri perspective, coffee, tea, pyrethrum, cocoa, it is all in many instances going as raw form. And actually the amount of technology needed to do 3 or 4x value addition is quite limited. Why don't we do it? I think it's a question of probably lack of capital, lack of knowledge. I don't actually know why we don't do it, but I mean, that's where we're focusing a lot of our attention, moving businesses more towards a value addition and closer to the end customer. And depending on the value chain you look at, if you split, for example, $100 of coffee that's being sold to you as a consumer of coffee, where are the margins that are sitting? It's quite interesting to note that the maximum margins happen to be in Europe. When the processing happens, the minimum stays in Africa, whereas you could actually capture 70% of the value addition in Africa, right? And that's how the livelihood and the impact amplifies for us. So those are the, so impact is a first screen, but we're not an impact-only fund.
Yeah.
Profitability comes through, and then how do we add value to that business to move them up the value chain so that you become a lot more investable and also move away from the commodity fluctuations that many of our businesses unfortunately suffer from.
Yeah, and to make that transition, like you said, one of the arguments you hear quite often is that we are not cost competitive, right, to be able to produce those things and compete with other markets. And one of the things we've also said is that infrastructure plays a key role in that. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we've also not been cost competitive, right? So I will move to Andrew very quickly. You've done a lot of work that has spanned infrastructure development across multiple parts of Africa. And for me, the question is, what are those infrastructure deficits that you see that needs to be amended, and how can we channel capital, the right type of capital to those development requirements for us to be able to support this kind of endeavors that we are thinking about?
So I think it's quite a long list, but I mean, I'd start prioritizing in terms of water. So most of Africa has ample water, but it's not stored. And if you look at the different countries, different climates within the same country, say take Kenya as an example, the high altitude, high rainfall areas are very prosperous. They rely on rain-fed agriculture. There's plenty of water, and it's created jobs, it's created opportunities. But outside of those high rainfall areas, it's not prosperous. The agriculture doesn't thrive because of lack of water. But there's plenty of water during the rainy season. So if that water was actually stored, and you could learn from what's happening in other countries, then it would transform jobs, it would transform agriculture, it would transform opportunity. And if you look outside of Africa, I mean, if you use, say, Peru as an example, what they did was to bring water from the Andes Mountains to the desert, so part of the driest regions of the world, and created a thriving agriculture which has transformed agricultural productivity in Peru. It's quite amazing to see. And I think that a lot of learnings can be taken from examples like that brought to Africa. And then within, of course, I mean, you've got things like the Volta Dam in Ghana and Tana River Irrigation Scheme in Kenya. There's all these different examples, and many of them are large sort of government-funded examples. But if you go down much smaller ones, if you learn from what they do in South Africa or in Zimbabwe and Zambia, there's a lot of storage of water on much smaller projects as well. And I think investment in water infrastructure would really transform it. It's very much needed. If you look at the sort of other side in terms of food storage, food processing, food loss is in the perishable sector. I think the food wastage is something like 50%. There's not adequate storage infrastructure, cold storage. We're actually doing some work at the moment for a funded project around looking at how we can transform this. And there's innovative businesses like Inspira Farms that are bringing in cold storage solutions, solar-powered solutions, to try to get to, say, cold storage in every district, in every village. And that's on the perishable side. If you look at the grains and oilseeds, the need for aggregation, for processing, for storage, I think even there, the wastage is something like 20%. So there's a lot that's needed. If you look at the market access, there's another area of not enough market access for smallholder farmers to get the produce to markets, and so there's a reliance on brokers and middlemen. So actually investment in aggregation, in storage, in processing, and being able to get that product to market, reduce loss, reduce wastage. These are just some examples, but the infrastructure need is quite a long list for probably a whole session in its own right.
Yeah, and what I hear is there are those gaps. The question then is, how do we finance those gaps, right? As capital providers, how do you make sure that you can get your capital out? Because whether you like it or not, at the end of the day, you need to get your money out at some point. But these are long-lasting projects that you want to do that you can't get your returns in 2-3 years. So what are your thoughts on that? How can we make sure the right kind of capital is appropriated for that particular need? No, Andrew, I'm exploring that a little bit further with you. How do you think the capital can be made available for that particular need in a way that fits the market and the need in the market?
Yeah, so I think there's infrastructure projects, large and small. So obviously the funds make quite a big difference. Our own fund is focusing on the SME sector, so we're looking very much at smaller infrastructure investments in cold storage solutions, aggregation, processing, that sort of thing. And then of course there's other funds focusing on larger infrastructure projects. But ultimately there's a massive funding gap, so we need more funding to enter this space, because as I mentioned right at the beginning, Africa has a fantastic potential. It's got the soil, the climate, the people, but we're a mile away from meeting that potential. So there just needs to be a significant increase in financing.
Yeah. If I may just add, I think to me, it's like asking the question, who needs to build the roads, right? It's the job of a government, right? Because these are very difficult projects for private sector to fund by themselves. Now, what private sector can do is do the add-ons where there's substantial value being created off a highway or, and this is where, I mean, some of the policy deficits that exist on the continent are not allowing us to build storage units or roads or whatever it is to get agri products from small-scale farmers in an efficient way to cities and hopefully to the export market.
Yeah, I think it's a good segue to come back to grants now. You've been put on the hot seat. Policy is a big challenge, and we need to translate those policies to actions. And like you said, we have 54 countries in Africa, right? So it's not the same across border. How can we manage that effectively?
Well, I think in general, agriculture is developed through the deployment of a combination of financial capital and ecological capital. And I'm not taking away from the very important part that financial capital plays. And I do think there's an interesting conversation about what is private sector, what is public sector, and what about the congruence in the middle to do PPPs. But to me, the conversation which is being perhaps avoided is that of the plight of smallholder farmers who do not have access to financial capital. They need to build ecological capital. So we talk about the quality of their soils, investment into permanent tree crops, drainage, terracing, really building up the ecology that drives production in their farm. And that has been, for many decades, in my opinion, neglected. And we need to look back towards our research institutions, our extension services, and the diversity of crops that we actually encourage our smallholder farmers to grow. Many of them have been reduced to rain-fed subsistence monocultures, which have no hope of either sustaining nutritional needs, nor being resilient to climate, nor making a commercial profit. So I think what we need to do is, yes, recognize that financial capital is absolutely critical, but open a discussion about a parallel investment into the ecological capital of the farms that our smallholders have, which are currently in a very desperate and depleted state.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting touch point on this impact on smallholder farmers. Because at the end of the day, the food is supplied by these farmers, right? And right now, as of today, 60% of the adult population in Africa is engaged in, agriculture in one way or the other. So if there's going to be a transformation in Africa economically, you have to find a way to touch the smallholder farmers, right? And so I will come to William on this point. You've done a lot with smallholder farmers across Africa. Some of the pain points that Grant has talked about, you've seen them live. How can we better leverage capital, policy, leadership to be able to properly galvanize support for the smallholder farmers, such that it's not just, it's not just a philanthropic exercise, but we're actually empowering them economically?
Yeah, thank you very much, and that's a great question. And building on what Grant has said, Africa is quite a diverse continent, diverse culture, diverse systems, and I appreciate when people talk about the complexities in terms of the logistics of doing business onto the continent. So where we've seen things work is especially to be able to concentrate on organizing the smallholder farmers, put into perspective the context in which they're operating in, The way you organize smallholder farmers in Nigeria may not be the way you organize them in Uganda, may not be the way you organize them in Kenya. But having an understanding of that framework, that step number one, organizing them is extremely very important. And then also you work on a mindset, issues, how do you influence on issues of production productivity, quality improvement? How do you then engage with government? Because you already have an organized infrastructure. And then when we make them investor ready, then that's when you can then pull in, the private sector. So the work which we do collaboratively with government to ensure that we can de-risk the environment is extremely very important to be able now to start introducing private sector to come into play and deploy their capital. And for us, the aspect of using a grant system to ensure that you can de-risk that environment is extremely very important. I'll give you an example. Using a debt grant approach, we've been able to set up, say, for instance, solar station, power station, 41 kVA, power stations, which are able to power, say, specific collection centers, and then subsequently farmers are able to have power, and suddenly then they can be able to aggregate their milk, and then that milk can go into the market. And because that has been done, then government comes in to start having a conversation. How do we build a road? How do we ensure that we work on policy issues that enables farmers to get access to quality inputs, to get access to cheap finance that can enable them to get to market? So the piece of organizing them, working on a mindset change, and then you de-risk that environment, which then can attract other actors to come and play into the ecosystem. For us, it's extremely very important.
Hearing you, all I'm hearing is leadership. Whether it's at the center of systems transformation or policy changes or driving capital, whether it's for infrastructure or for inputs or whatever it is, at the center of that is leadership. Having the right kind of leadership. And I'll come to Silan. You've done a lot of work in building, expanding businesses across multiple regions and categories. Mindset is important for leaders, for us to be able to drive this agricultural revolution within our different spaces. Many people who are sitting here today, they are leaders that I want to leave here today to think, how can we embrace that mindset? So for you, how do you think leaders can embrace that mindset of change? How to both leverage technology, leverage network, to be able to drive change, agricultural revolution in Africa?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the first point I want to make is if you listen to all of us speak, we speak about components. And what we do know is we need all these components to come together in a system. And then that will result in success. So you need the infrastructure to be there, you need the soil to work, you need the inputs to be available. When the crops are coming out, you need them to go through different processes. And I think the first thing we need is a deep understanding of that system. And that system, we can see, is not just an agriculture system. That system needs energy, it needs water, it needs roads, rails, ports, infrastructure. So it crosses different sectors. I think once we see that, and then we're talking to governments, to business leaders, to public sector and other institutions, I guess we have to focus our minds on the impact of what this achieves. And I think a number of the speakers have said it. It's life and livelihoods. And once you move through the life issue, you then can quickly create a lot of economic growth. And we see that GDPs in a number of countries are very strongly correlated to agriculture, and it's a big part of where Africa can achieve growth. I would say, when we think of changing the mindset, and it seems like such a complex problem to solve because you need governments to come together, you need the soil systems to work, you need the infrastructure to work. I think the purpose of why we're doing this needs to be put at the center. And as soon as we remind ourselves of the purpose, the impact that a fund or an organization or a sector makes, you start seeing things move. I just want to go a little bit into, a number of the speakers spoke about the differences and the complexity of Africa. And in our business, we believe we must bring the best of the world to Africa. So we believe from an innovation and a technology perspective, we should bring to farmers, whether they're small or whether they're large commercial farmers, the best technology, the ability to analyze the soil, the ability to accurately predict crop yield, the ability to accurately predict the quality of the crop. And that's where we've been investing a lot of effort in to make the plight of those subsistence and smaller commercial farmers a lot easier. Just to give you an example of that, So we don't believe you should be just using nutrient and water. We believe you should be using the scientific amount that is needed. So we have probes in the ground that measure soil moisture conditions and will actually tell farmers not to irrigate when it's not needed. Tell them what needs to be put into the soil. I often give the example of we can accurately predict the crunchiness of an apple to 95% accuracy from the sap of the 6-week apple plant leaf. So we can take that leaf, squeeze the sap, and with 70 years of data that we've accumulated, tell our farmers with a high degree of accuracy what the crunchiness of this apple would be. And we believe that precision, that technology, that innovation will drive the change that's needed in the agriculture sector on our continent. We believe that the best of the world, the best of technology, the best of supply chain, the best of infrastructure will be what catapults and changes the continent's future around food production, not only from a sustaining life, but also being able to, at some point, be a net exporter of food.
Thank you very much. I think you nicely tied things together. I might have one more opportunity to ask a few questions, but I want to go very quickly to the audience if there are questions in the audience. Okay, there is one question. Any other questions so that before we take it? Okay, one. All right. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Ruby. The company is called Supiva, supporting the divas in Africa. Women are the major producers of food in Africa. Organizers, this panel, we have zero gender balance on this panel. No offense, men, you're very good looking. It's nice to see you up on this panel. Good to have you there, but organizers, come on, it's 2024. Where is our gender balance? So men on the panel, gentlemen of the panel, I would love to learn more about some of the initiatives that you are pushing in terms of gender. Women, as we say, make up 70% of the production, yet they own less than 15% of the land in which agriculture is being produced on. Yet they're the ones who are feeding us. The women are the ones who are doing the work. They're the ones who are feeding us in Africa. So I would love to hear more of the work that you're doing when it comes to ensuring that we are creating a much more gender equitable world. And once again, to the organizers, please, let's create much more gender balance in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that observation, which I think is very obvious. Just before we came up, we were having that conversation amongst ourselves, and I think it skipped my mind. I was supposed to, try and placate the audience and say, look, we recognize it and we'll hopefully do better next time. But I think it's an interesting question you've raised, and I will just open it to anyone who wants to take that question on.
So I think I'll have a first attempt,
Okay.
because I know Ruby's going to come back with vengeance. So look, I don't think there's a simple answer to this, right? Because you don't get farmers that are saying these are the segments of women, these are the segments of... These are small-scale farming is a family business, right? I was in Tanzania last week, Uganda the week before. Whether we like it or not, it's the man, the wife, and maybe the kids during the holiday. That's the reality of Africa. We can say what we want to, but that's reality. The issues are on impact, right? Are they making livelihoods enough to earn? Number two is, can we influence gender balances where we can influence it, right? No point just talking about it. How do we influence it? So when we are investing in businesses, we just did an investment in Privim Nuts. It's half owned by the wife, half owned by the husband. Great, gender balance is there. 80% of the women there are women. Great. Would I have not made the investment if it was the other way around? No, I would still have made the investment, because the net benefit to society is immensely housed. They are supporting over 10,000 small-scale farmers, and of course, women are going to benefit from it. Are we influencing that management team have more women representation? Yes, we are, right? So I don't think it's as simple as you make an investment in a woman-led organization. I think there is a path to that, or you're asking starvation. if I become a little more dramatic about it. But that's just my simplistic view as an investor, as opposed to policymakers, which may have a different way of looking at this.
It would be good if we can get one. Maybe William can just come up on that. And I hear the bill. I'm attentive to it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I work for a non-profit. Health International is a non-profit, and we've been on the continent for the last 50 years. I mean, doing the same sort of work of empowering women and also youth. But also what we've come to learn over the past 10 years, 5 years, is that if you introduce a friendly technology that can be able to support women participate effectively within specific food chains, then that brings about the empowerment story. So for the past 3 years, we've introduced a challenge on the continent called Ayute, whereby we basically, looking for innovative, young, enterprising Africans to sort of like bring on board those technologies that can make life easier for smallholder farmers. And since we introduced that challenge, we've been able to identify innovations that are context-specific, which are able to provide solutions to the farming households onto the continent. Being able to provide, tools that can enable, women to read weather forecasts, and then they plant on time, or even, identify those research institutions that are able to have, resilient, say for instance, seed breeds that women can plant onto the continent, or having tools like treadle pumps that can enable them to get access to irrigation facilities so that they can be able to produce efficiently and effectively without immensely being affected by weather. So the deployment of technology, I think, is extremely important on the continent to be able to empower women to get into the food systems that can enable them to empower their livelihoods.
Thank you very much, William. And I think we're beginning to see a lot more of that as well, of those kind of technologies being deployed. I know we're running out of time. Unfortunately, I don't think I can take any more questions. I'm 1 minute on the mark. But I still want to give the panelists 30 seconds just to give tie things together. What in terms of agricultural revolution in Africa, what is that one word you want to leave with the audience here today to go with? I will start from, let me start from the other way around this time around. Start from William.
There's hope, like all of us said at the beginning, the opportunity is great. If there's any continent that is on the transformation, it's Africa. But tapping into the young population onto that continent, technology is going to be very key. We're seeing an aging farmer, but also you have this young population. The statistics indicating that the farmer on the continent is at the age of about 60 years. Okay, but then at the same time, you have this other youthful population. For them to get interested, you have to plug into technology. And that's what will possibly bring about a leap onto the continent's agricultural food system, pretty much.
Thank you very much. Grant.
I think when we talk about the agricultural revolution, at the heart of it is knowledge. And really, I would say that if we want to see this revolution become a reality, we need to be really looking at our knowledge systems and revisiting the way in which we do agricultural research, the way in which we bring technologies into our extension services, and how we ensure that knowledge is equitably accessible by all farmers, large or small.
Thank you very much, Grant. Andrew.
Well, I think the opportunity is huge because the gap is huge versus its potential, and that's everywhere across the value chain, whether it be in the input, service provision, the primary agriculture, the aggregators, processors, the ag tech, and there's the population there. You've got the people. You've got actually a skilled, entrepreneurial, hard-working workforce with a lot of youth, and yeah, there needs more financing into this sector to then pull it together and actually help make it achieve its potential. But it's an exciting place to be in. I'm so fortunate to be in this sector, African agriculture. The opportunity is immense and great people to be working with.
Thank you, Andrew. Ashish.
I couldn't agree more. I think the sector is incredibly exciting. There's a lot to be done in Africa. There's a lot of financial opportunity as well as impact outcomes that we can achieve here. I personally think for us to go through a super growth cycle, as a revolution may suggest, we just need very coordinated policies from a top-down approach. And we could do technology, we could do knowledge, we could do everything, but without the railroads, the basic stuff, you can't get it to market.
Thanks, Ashish. And finally,
Yeah, I guess from my side, there's so much excitement on the panel. You know, I would say what we need to do is take that excitement and put it into the people of our different countries. We need more youngsters, more women, more university students, more students at school to be excited about agriculture. And that's a little bit of a change, because most people want to go to the cities and do something different. And we need to take that excitement, that passion, and show them the ecosystem of how data, innovation, chemistry, entrepreneurship can be done in the sector, and how it can make a meaningful impact to the billions of lives across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to say a big thanks to the audience as well for sitting through this panel session. So that brings us to session 2 an end. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.